Part 2 in Lesson 1 deals with solvability. Solvability is looking at factors that will help you determine your success in bringing a case to a close, a successful conclusion with identification of the suspect, an arrest, indictment, a conviction of a suspect on a case. One of the first factors we look at are the witnesses. How many witnesses are there? The more witnesses to a crime, the more likelihood we're going to be able to solve that crime. Do they know the suspect? Any witnesses that know the suspect is going to be important because, again, that's going to get us closer to solving this crime. Or if they don't know the suspect, can they identify the suspect? And the identification may be through voice, through identification. Can they look at photographs to try to identify this person? Can they draw, or can they give a description to an artist who can then give us a rendition of what this person looks like? The more of these factors that we can put together with the witness, the better we can come to solving this crime. Suspect identified. One of the things is if we have a suspect identified already, we still need to gather evidence. You may remember back in the first part of this series, we talked about identifying a suspect as an officer who might happen upon the scene of a crime, but we still need to gather evidence. The suspect may deny their involvement. It's the burden of the government to prove that the accused has committed the crime, so you still need to gather evidence, and you still need to put your case together as if this suspect, even if they confessed, you could still prove that they committed the crime without that information. Traceable property, serial numbers, vehicles, things like that, anything that's traceable. A couple of instances in Pan Am 103, the bombing over where the plane was blown up over Lockerbie, Scotland, there was a small piece of a motherboard to a timing device, and there was a serial number on that. They were able to trace that serial number back to the manufacturer, and in fact, this timing device, only a limited number of these devices had been made, and this was, again, kind of unique, so it was a key element in doing two things. One, showing where the possible event occurred, but also helping them put the crime scene back together and identifying other things that were around this item were then found to be key in identifying possibly who planted this device in the aircraft. Also, vehicles. In 1993, there was a bombing of the World Trade Center where a terrorist put a vehicle in the basement of the Trade Center with explosives. A confidential vehicle identification number was able to identify and track that. And we can point to many cases where traceable property have been sent back and identified people based upon rental receipts and things of that nature. Lots of physical evidence, and that might not be a real technical term, but the more physical evidence you have, it's kind of like the odds of finding something. You know, the more physical evidence you have, the more likelihood you're going to be able to find something that is going to connect to somebody else. The better you're going to be able to put this case back together. Another one is the MO, or modus operandi. A person who commits a crime, when they're successful, they tend to repeat those successes, and they get a kind of a personal signature. And this personal signature becomes their modus operandi. And they do the same thing all the time. I had a case where we had a guy called the Midday Macer. He would go in to a bank, he would apply for a loan. While he was filling out the paperwork, when the bank would clear out, he would then produce a weapon, rob the bank, and then spray everybody with mace. That was his MO. And by tying him in, once he was arrested with a almost empty can of mace, we were able to tie in the different robberies and connect them because of that MO. Something else along the lines of MO that is kind of important here as well is looking beyond your own jurisdiction for other similar crimes that may help you solve this. More about that in a minute. In the last 25, 30 years, criminal profiling has become very important. Criminal profiling is basically behavioral patterns that help us identify suspects by identifying key things that a person would do. This was started out by examining and questioning people who had committed serial crimes, serial rapists, serial murderers, and trying to get an idea of how they did and why they did certain things. And by examining those patterns, they were able to come up with some key things that would occur. And by doing that, we are able to maybe identify key suspects. Also, profiling is helpful in questioning techniques. Once we have identified one of these key suspects, what are those things that might make that person talk? Are they very religious? Does the appeal to their telling the truth, is that going to help them? The embarrassment of the family or whatever. Profiling helps develop those questioning techniques that would elicit the responses and maybe even uncover more evidence as a result of that. When do you close a case? You know, we talk about all these solvability factors and things of that nature, and there comes a time when, because of your caseload, you have to go to something new. And the case kind of gets pushed to the side. Maybe you have a case review and you get to the end, you just said, there's nothing else there. The leads have been exhausted. It's a cold case. And there's nothing else to identify there. You've looked at evidence that was recovered from the scene of the crime, and it produces no new leads. There's no leads from the street. In other words, your informants aren't telling you anything. Citizens aren't telling you anything. Nothing else is going out. And this is the last one here, is one I mentioned earlier, is that there's no leads from other agencies. When you have a case, you need to let other agencies know what's going on. If you're a local law enforcement agency, you need to reach out to the cities and counties surrounding you to see what's going on with them, to see if they're having a similar crime. If a person's going to rob convenience stores in one town, why can't they just rob convenience stores around an area? Or if this is a case where a person is moving from one community to another, you may find a string of robberies that were spread out over a period of time. We had a case where a bank robber who lived in the Atlanta area never robbed banks in the Atlanta area. He would go to South Carolina, he would go to Alabama, he would go to Tennessee, and then eventually on to Arkansas. As he was beginning to exhaust his locations, he would keep moving further and further out, committing robberies, and we were able to track those robberies. And once he was arrested, we were able to link all these others back to him. But when there's no leads from other agencies, then this is a good time to close a case. A case that's closed but not solved is never completely settled. So you always have that cold case file that thing sits back, and if a case similar to that comes back up again, you dig this back up and look at similar evidence, especially if you have evidence that may identify a person, such as a fingerprint or something like that. That will be helpful in tying that person in with other crimes.